What's going on, everybody? Brezzy43 here, coming at you with our next video. I want to do something a little different today. So, the new season started on March 1st, and I've been talking to. I'm in the middle of teaching a good friend of mine some Pokemon, and I'm also in the middle of building some new teams and thinking about the metagame. And one of the things that I've been seeing in a lot of the streams that I frequent, as well as a lot of the conversation among people in the media that I consume for Pokemon, whether it's Reddit or various streamers' discords and things like that, that team building is hard. Team building is very difficult. On top of that, people tend to dislike team building in a restricted metagame. So I thought it would be fun to do a little bit of educational content here, and share some team building 101, if you will, for what I do when I team build. Now, I by no means am the perfect team builder. A lot of the teams that I build have flaws. A lot of them I have to spend a long time working with. I have to work very carefully on certain components, and ultimately, one of the things that I end up doing oftentimes, or at least as a thought experiment, is end up scrapping teams just because they don't quite play out the way that I had hoped in the matchups. So what I mean by that is, in your head, you think that a game is, or a team's going to play out one way. In reality, it just doesn't. And it's important to recognize that, as a player, because you don't want to be forcing an idea that's just not quite there, depending on what, of course, your objective is. But more on that when we get into it here. So I went ahead and did something a little different, and I went with a PowerPoint presentation. So a little bit different here, but I'm gonna just go through it. I think it'll be fun. Unfortunately, I'm not very PowerPoint savvy, so when I try to do the play from the beginning, it ends up taking up both of my screens, and I don't like that. So we're just going to go with this. So, Team Building 101, the basics. So, ultimately, there are many ways to team build, and you'll often find that a lot of players will approach it differently. A lot of the really good players that are far better than me at the game will approach things in a slightly different way. It's okay, and it's often important to consider what other players are using. It's okay to even steal some ideas. Now, I have steal in quotations there because I think most players are fine sharing ideas and allowing uses of teams. If they wouldn't be streaming. But also, like, there's not really any main events going on right now, so people aren't really hiding information or anything like that. I know in Magic, since I come from a Magic the Gathering background, the Magic is a little bit tougher to decipher information like this. The way that the information's gathered is not quite as accessible as, it can be in Pokemon, depending on things like Liberty Note and various things like that. But ultimately, taking in your surroundings and seeing what people are doing is a really important component of team building. Consider synergies and style of your team. So, are you a hyper offensive team? Are you a bulky offensive team? Are you a trick room team? Are you a defensive team that looks to pivot and stall your opponent's offensive out and try to position it into a good position to sweep with your sweeper? These are all important things to consider when team building, as well as what your intention in metagame are. So what is your intention? What do I mean by that? Some players, they just want to play with their favorite Pokemon, and that's a totally okay intention. I prefer to play as competitive as possible. I do enjoy exploring various archetypes, and exploring various Pokemon in those archetypes, so I know full well that I may not be using the best possible Pokemon for a given role or whatever, but I often like exploring ideas, and I'm fully aware usually that I may be using an inferior Pokemon and will often switch. And what is your other intention could be competitive, Like I said, if you want to win a bunch of games, then you're going to build to win a bunch of games, or you might just borrow other people's ideas. That's totally fine. What is your metagame? So this is more important now in Series 8 than ever before, because the metagame previously has been pretty wide open, but Series 8 has some unique specifications that I'll touch on a little bit more later. But basically, what's popular, what are people using, how can you exploit that? That's the basics of team building here. So consider what other players are doing, consider your synergies and style of team that you're running, and what is your intention or goal, and what is your metagame. Okay, we're going to talk about the essentials, things that I think should be on every single team, and things that I often have to consider on every single team. One of the most important components of VGC doubles is speed control. You want to make sure that Pokemon gives you, there's a huge advantage in attacking first in Pokemon, or moving first in Pokemon. Sorry, I'm just adjusting the volume here. That's why my eyes are darting over. But being able to attack first in Pokemon is a really, really important component of the game. Previously, the most popular ones have been Tailwind and Trick Room. This metagame, we've got Max Airstream, as well as less popular but still a thing, Max Strike. Tailwind and Max Strike and Trick Room and Max Airstream are all really common and often on a lot of teams, as well as some other support moves like Electroweb, Scary Face, Thunder Wave. Ultimately, what methods of speed control do you have on your team? If you're Hyper Offense, you probably have Tailwind and ways of stopping Trick Room. If you are bulky offense, you likely have a Max Airstream or Max Strike user, as well as maybe potentially a Trick Room component. Sometimes you'll see people double up on, they'll have an Airstream user as well as another support Pokemon like Regieleki with Electroweb, or a Grimmsnarl with Scary Face or Thunder Wave. These are all important things to consider. How are you going to help your Pokemon attack first? That's probably the most important thing in Pokemon team building, or one of the most important things for sure. Second, one thing I see a lot of is typing synergy. You don't want to have too many redundant weaknesses. If you have a team, if you have a team that is 6 Pokemon weak to water, probably not going to have a good time. Now, Fire, Water, Grass I have in parentheses here because this is probably one of the most common, if not the most common, synergy-oriented typing that you can have. Typing of Pokemon, or type synergy-oriented Pokemon. There we go. That's what I meant to say. So Fire, Water, Grass Pokemon cover each other very, very well. Fire types, if your opponent's going to attack you with a water move, you can switch into your water or your grass type. If they're going to attack you with a rock move, you can switch into either of them and maybe not take as much damage as you would as a fire. If they're going to attack you with a ground move, switch into grass, resist it, and pressure it from there. Same with grass. If you're going to get hit with a fire move, switch into water or fire. Bug move, switch into fire. Water gets covered by grass very well, with electric and grass being resisted by grass, and fire also resists grass. So these Pokemon pick up a ton of resistances together, and are often very, very good synergy-wise. Another really common one is Steel Dragon Fairy. For those of you that have been playing for a while, during Series 5, we saw a really potent Steel Fairy Dragon duo or trio rise up in the form of Excadrill, Togekiss, and Dragapult. And they kind of formed the bulky offense, mid-range centric team style that you see, because they have, between all 3 of them, they pick up 6 immunities, tons of resistances. They cover each other very well. So ultimately that was one of the Steel Fairy Dragons that you can use. But Fire, Water, Grass, we see things right now like Incineroar, Moongus, Rotom, Incineroar, Moongus, Lapras. We see Incineroar, Moongus, or Incineroar, Kartana, Kyogre. We see Tapu Fini often in this water slot. Rillaboom can occupy the grass slot. Other good fire types are, Incineroar is really, really popular, but there's also things like Charizard, and Heatran occasionally will squeak in the metagame. So typing is really important on your team. You want to diversify your types as best as you can. or at least diversify the number of weaknesses that you have that are redundant, right? You don't want to have too many ghost weeks or too many fairy weeks or whatever. Damage and support equilibrium. This is something that I personally struggled with a little bit. I often found myself running too much support and not enough damage, playing too defensively or building too defensively. But basically this means all of your Pokemon in VGC should have some ability to deal damage. For those of you that are singles players or coming from singles, Pokemon like Toxapex are not good in VGC because they don't have any damage. They suffer from what VGC players call "all my friends are dead" syndrome. I think they AFARD, AFARD syndrome, or AMFARD syndrome. You need to be able to do some sort of consistent amount of damage. It's part of the reason why a Pokemon like Dusclops runs Nightshade, right? Because it's not going to be dealing much damage normally, so it runs the only consistent damage output it has. Even a Pokemon like Amoonguss still has an 85 special attack stat that often will carry one attacking move, so it at least can do something. But generally, Pokemon, really common support Pokemon like Incineroar, Arcanine was another big one for a lot of VGC, Grimmsnarl. These Pokemon have really high offensive stats. Togekiss was another one that Togekiss also had a really good ability. These Pokemon don't need to have much investment in their offensive stats because they already have really solid stats in general, and they don't need to be invested in to actually work. But often you may have to, like a Pokemon like Raichu that I've been using a lot of, I may have to invest more EVs into special attack so it can deal damage. You need to make sure that the 4 Pokemon that you bring to a battle can deal damage. And we'll talk more about that later on one of my teams that I showcase as well. And the last thing on this page here is just strategy and consistency. What is your team doing? What's your style of team? What's your main win condition? One of the things that I've been telling the person I've been teaching Pokemon to is, what's your end game? You should always have an end game in mind. What are you playing to? You don't want to just be Dynamaxing and clicking buttons. You should be thinking about how the game is going to end. What are my next few turns going to look like so I can play to the end game that I want? We actually built a team, me and my friend, we built a team involving Ferrothorn. His team was a offensive team that plays to a Ferrothorn endgame. So when you play to a Ferrothorn endgame, your strategy is to knock out all the things that Ferrothorn can't deal with, and then if they're Ferrothorn, clean them up afterwards. And consistency, how reliably are you able to do what you want to do? Are you a Trick Room team with only one reliable way to set up Trick Room? You may want to reconsider. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to build your team to be not as reliant on the Trick Room, or etc. So this is really important to consider your strategy and consider what your team's doing and how well it can consistently and accurately execute its game plan. So how do you start? So start with your intent. This is what I tell a lot of people. This is what I tell my friend. We built his team. We set out to build a Gyarados team. He loves Gyarados. We set out to build a Gyarados team. My previous ones, I set out to build the best X team, or I want to use X Pokemon, or I want to explore this strategy. What are you hoping to do with your team? If you want to win a lot of games, you should use what's good. That's totally fine and acceptable. Use what's good, make some small tweaks accordingly, and go from there. If you want to explore a strategy, like in my Series 7 team, I wanted to explore Bronzong. I thought Bronzong was a really unique metagame call because it matches up so well against Glastrier, and Glastrier was on every team. And I built a really solid Bronzong team. And I had to work some kinks out, but ultimately I really liked where it ended up. That was my intention with that team. Your intention could be whatever. It could be to use your favorite Pokemon. It could be to try a specific support Pokemon or try a specific set or whatever. Totally fine, but make sure you have an idea of where exactly it is that you want to start. This could also, further building on that, is building from the ground up. Is there a specific interaction you want to build from? So for example, Weakness Policy Metagross with Brutal Swing Tornadus, or Tailwind Tornadus with Water Spout Kyogre, or some historic examples. Weakness Policy Rhyperior with Bulldoze Dusclops. Or do you want to do something with Grimmsnarl Screens and you want to be a bulky team? You can start with a specific Pokemon or two Pokemon that synergize well together and build from there. That often doesn't necessarily play to a specific metagame, but that can often be a really, really great place to start with your team building, because ultimately you should have interactions that are strong and powerful that you can build off of and exploit. Series 8 even more so. You should be picking which restricted Pokemon you want to use and building a team around them. A prime example is Lapras Zacian. Zacian is a Pokemon that can't Dynamax, and Lapras is a Pokemon that is only good when it Dynamaxes, essentially. It has some niche scenarios where you bring it for a Perish Song endgame, but ultimately, if you are bringing Dynamax, or if you bring in Lapras, you are Dynamaxing it, and Zacian cannot Dynamax. So therefore, they make a reasonable pairing, especially when you consider that one of the only checks to Zacian is Kyogre, or one of the best checks to Zacian is Kyogre, and Water Absorb Lapras just takes care of Kyogre very, very handily. Another potential example is I looked at Yveltal for a while because I love using Raichu, and I think Raichu is a really unique metagame call right now. That's another prime example. I could start there and build out accordingly. I'm really interested in Weakness Policy Yveltal with Sash or Assault Vest Raichu, and building sort of a bulky offense team that makes a lot of ground off pivoting and smart switching and can play defensive through intimidates and whatnot. So all things to consider. Where are you starting? What restricted Pokemon do you want to use in Series 8? What interaction do you want to explore in other series? Okay. Identifying your metagame. This is something that can be difficult to do. Series 8, not so much. Series 6 was another one for us that we did a very good job of identifying. But sometimes Series 7, to me, felt wide open. And so often it was more impactful for you to build something strong rather than building, like, identifying what's good and popular, because often the popularity of things was not super high because everyone was playing a bunch of different stuff. But if you can narrow in your metagame on a few different Pokemon or a few different teams or styles of teams that are doing very good or very well, you can exploit those teams and pick up some easy wins. We'll talk more about that in one of my examples. I have a really good example of one of my previous teams identifying your metagame. And finally, support mons or sweepers. I don't usually like to simplify Pokemon into those two categories because it's far more complex than that. But ultimately, you should be thinking about which Pokemon on your team are going to be sweepers and which Pokemon on your team are going to support your sweepers. For example, here's a really obvious example. A Pokemon like Amoonguss, probably not going to be a sweeper. It gets a lot of leverage off of its ability to redirect attacks away from your sweeper and put the opposing Pokemon to sleep. A really good example of a sweeper is a Pokemon like Metagross. Metagross is going to want to Dynamax most of the games that you bring it, or it's going to be dealing out a ton of damage, and therefore you should be using it for that reason. Now, occasionally you'll see, this is a bit of a side tangent, but occasionally you'll see people use Pokemon in new and creative ways. Some Pokemon should not be used that way. Like, I don't think anyone's going to go max special attack Amoonguss and start Dynamaxing Amoonguss. That's an example of one that you probably shouldn't deviate from. But ultimately, back to the original point here, support Pokemon and support mons or sweepers. Where do you want to start? For me, another, talking about that Bronzong team again, I didn't think of Bronzong as either one, as a sweeper or a support. I thought of it as a cleanup mon that also got access to Trick Room. An example of that was, I also wanted to explore Moltres. Moltres was a fantastic Dynamax candidate that was very bulky, played well in that style of team with Bronzong, and it allowed me to narrow in my support of Raichu. I want to use Raichu to support my Moltres, redirect electric attacks away from it, help it set up Nasty Plot with Fake Out, proc its own weakness policy with Volt Switch, be disruptive with Nuzzle, slow down speed for Moltres, etc. All these things are things that I considered when I was team building. So definitely things to consider when you start building your team. What's your intent? What are you hoping to accomplish with this team? Do you have a specific interaction that you want to build from, or a specific Pokemon you want to build around? What's your metagame? And who are your supports and your sweepers? Okay? How's everyone doing? So I've kind of talked about the essentials and the basics here and how to start. I want to move into some examples that I've used previously to great success. So let's go ahead and go to this next slide here. I have 3 solid examples of 3 different ways that I've team built in the past. So let's talk about this first one. Series 6, I approached my friend. His name is Ben. And I said, Ben, Series 6 is happening. This is the first time ever that they've banned Pokemon in a metagame ever. 15 of them got banned. I think it was 15. It might have been 20. I want to build a team, and I want your help. And Ben is an avid singles player, who he hasn't played much recently, but he used to play a lot. And he's been learning doubles with me as we go, getting a lot of insight from me, but helping me ultimately with type synergies and things like that. And one of Ben's all-time favorite Pokemon is Volcarona, and so he wanted to build a team around Volcarona. Now, Series 6, we just had some interesting bans. We had Togekiss banned, Dragapult, Excadrill, Incineroar, Rillaboom. There was also Whimsicott. There was Porygon. There was a plethora of them. I could Google it and show you. But ultimately, there was some things that were rising up in the metagame that a lot of people were using on ladder. Specifically, there was 2 that I can remember off the top of my head that we specifically built for. One of them was Lapras. People were using weakness policy Lapras with Comfy. This was at the start of the Isle of Armor, and Comfy was a popular Pokemon, or had just come out in the Isle of Armor, and people were like, "Oh, you can pair this with Lapras, get a weakness policy activation off with Absorb, and start sweeping." Another really, really popular one was Porygon Z. Porygon Z Clefairy was everywhere. People were using it everywhere. So reanalyzing this team does a few very specific things that led us to, this was the team that I'm A, most proud of, and B, we executed very, very well into a known metagame and climbed the highest I've ever climbed on the ranked ladder, which was top 75. I think I probably could have gotten higher if I had more time to play. I think that was another one of those situations where I didn't get as much time to play during the particular month, and by the time I started, it was already midway through the month, so I might have been able to make a push for top 50, maybe even beyond that. So yeah, so this particular team synergized off a couple of things. There was a unique interaction that I was really interested in trying, that was Reuniclus Liepard. So Liepard is Prankster with Copycat. And for those of you that don't know, real quick, not to get too deep on this, but Liepard, there was a Wolfglick made a team for a regionals event involving Copycat Liepard with Reuniclus, this exact interaction. His team also featured Dusclops Rhyperior, but we changed up these middle mons for other reasons. So Copycat is a move that copies the last move used on the battlefield. It's a non-damaging move, and so it gets Prankster boosted, and it uses the last move that was used on the battlefield. And the main question that they asked when they built this team was, what happens when Liepard copies a max move, right? You don't want Copycat to fail, so they made it so you copy the base move, right? So Max Lightning turned into Thunderbolt, let's say, so Copycat would copy Thunderbolt. Well, what if the last move used was Max Guard? Max Guard, it would turn into the base move, and so Reuniclus, you can lead Liepard Reuniclus, you can Dynamax Reuniclus, and you can go for max guard from your Trick Room, and Copycat from Liepard will copy the base move of Reuniclus's max guard, which is Trick Room. So you can get a Prankster setting off of Trick Room. You can use it to reverse your opponent, reversing your Trick Room, etc. Liepard had Fake Out and Fake Tears as well. So it was a fantastic support for Reuniclus that also allowed it to set up Trick Room very, very freely if it was not safe to do so in the face of spread moves or what have you. Second, we had a really nice interaction between Liepard and Rotom. This Rotom was very specific. It was designed to beat Lapras. We had Rotom EV'd specifically to outspeed modest Lapras by 1, as fast as Lapras could be. A lot of them were running a lot of speed back then. I think they might have been running max speed, max special attack, modest Lapras. So we were EV'd to outspeed it by 1, and we were modest with enough special attack to give us the best chance at KOing Lapras with Fake Tears. So we would go Fake Tears, Liepard, Rotom, Max Lightning, just Max on turn 1, no nasty plot. And we would nuke the Lapras. After the absorbed chip damage from the Comfey, it would usually KO. So that was Rotom. Among other things, it was also a ground resist as well, or ground immunity, as well as a good water type. Now, Volcarona was specifically EV'd to outspeed Porygon Z by 1. Timid Porygon Z could not outspeed Volcarona, and Volcarona had Struggle Bug. So some people resulted to using Arcanine as well. Arcanine had Snarl and was the same speed as Volcarona. But the reason why we wanted Volcarona on this team was, 1, because we liked it and we wanted to use the team. But 2, we also wanted the ability to have Rage Powder for our various Trick Room setters. We had Trick Room on Reuniclus and Trick Room on Dusclops. So being able to Rage Powder and set Trick Room, as well as having that interaction of knowing that we were faster than Porygon Z could ever be, Struggle Bug being a spread move that drops special attack of your opponent's Pokemon. After the Kelk, our Dusclops spread specifically was designed to live -1 Helping Hand boosted, Life Orb boosted Max Darkness, which is essentially from P2 or PZ, which is essentially just base, right? Helping Hand removes the Struggle Bug drop. And Volcarona could live the Max Strike. Volcarona could live -1 Max Strike, even Helping Hand boosted. So that was Volcarona, and then Rhyperior was just a Bulldoze. This was just a Bulldoze weakness policy set. So this is an example of a team that I built in with my friend Ben into a known metagame. And because we knew the metagame, we were able to so accurately call it. We were able to build a team that was designed to take advantage of a metagame and exploit it, right? So that's this team in a nutshell, basically. An example of calling a metagame as well as using some really strong interactions, right? Some teams were really weak to Trick Room. We had multiple ways to set up Trick Room. We had Copycat Reuniclus. We had Fake Out Trick Room from either Reuniclus or Dusclops. And we had Rage Powder Volcarona with either of these. So we had fantastic ways to set up Trick Room, 3 different ways, especially since our team was mostly reliant on it. We did have Volcarona and Rotom, who didn't necessarily need to be in Trick Room. But Volcarona served multiple roles as well, because some people started to explore Pokemon like Durant again during this series, and Volcarona can just eat up Durant. So that was Volcarona. And that was the metagame call that we made to exploit a metagame with a team. During Series 7, I talked about this earlier in this video. I wanted to build a good stuff switching mid-range bulky offense team. The team was centered around Raichu, supporting either Moltres or Fini, cycling with Incineroar, being able to double Fake Out, Volt Switch, and Parting Shot, the 2 of them, with Moltres being a fantastic weakness policy carrier. And Fini was left over as bulky with Calm Mind. But ultimately it played to a Bronzong endgame. This Bronzong had leftovers, but Bronzong I explored a Trick Room option. I never quite got this team to be where I wanted it to be. Um, Mudsdale, I didn't stick with for very long. This team had a huge Tapu Fini problem, as well as only having a couple of ground immunities. So I had to go back to the drawing board on specifically this Mudsdale slot. I wanted to change it up for something else, but this team had a ton of options, right? We had a bulky Moltres with Raichu lead. Tapu Fini was great. This team could lead like Moltres, Raichu, Incineroar, Fini. It could lead Moltres, Raichu, Incineroar, Bronzong. It could lead Fini plus any combination of those. It had a Trick Room mode of Fake Out plus Trick Room on Bronzong to then Parting Shot away into Mudsdale. Tons of different options that it could do. And ultimately, I think I did end up climbing reasonably high in the ladder with it, but this was an example of a team that I used to explore an idea, right? Series 7 was huge and wide open, and it was really difficult to narrow in on something, on a specific metagame like we did for Series 6. So for Series 7, we decided, okay, let's just use something that we think is good and we want to explore and get some information about. And turns out we were right. Bronzong was a fantastic metagame call. Glastrier has a very difficult time dealing with Bronzong because you resist ice, you are immune to ground, and you're neutral to fighting, which is its weakest move. And you can set up on it with Iron Defense, Body Press, leftovers with Protect and Trick Room. And you also, you don't underspeed it, but you can reverse opposing Trick Rooms that way. And then Moltres was a fantastic Pokemon. This team made me fall in love with Moltres. Moltres is a phenomenal Pokemon, one of my favorites to use right now. I will probably be revisiting this team come Series 9 in May. I'll probably go back to the drawing board and do some tweaking, but ultimately be sticking with a lot of what this team brought about it. So an example of a team that I picked a synergy or an idea. Double Fake Out's been historically good. Bronzong is good in metagames with legendaries and against Glastrier, and I just kind of ran with it. In Series 8, this is the last team that I wanted to talk about. This is the team I've been playing the most on this channel, and to the best effect. And this is an example of a team that I found that somebody was already using, or multiple people were already using. There was a bunch of different variations of it, right? A lot of people were using Regieleki instead of Raichu. A lot of people were using Double Intimidate with Incineroar and Lando, but ultimately the core of the team was Lapras, Incineroar, and Moongazation. The last two slots could be taken up by whatever you wanted. Some people ran Coco, some people ran Lando, some people ran Aleki, whatever. But this team was a really good example of what I talked about in this video, of just taking what somebody else is doing and running with it, right? It's okay to borrow ideas. It's okay to steal ideas, if you will. This team plays to my style. I love these type of teams right now. I'm not a very good hyper offense player. I needed more practice with it. This is an example of a team that I can use very, very well. It has really good switching potential. It does have a bit of a ground weakness, which we never really did get figured out. We have 3 ground weaks and only 1 ground immunity, but we have a water immunity. We have 2 psychic immunities. We have a ground immunity. We have poison and dragon immunity. We have an electric immunity. We have a ton of switching potential with Regenerator and Parting Shot and Fake Out Volt Switch. And like, this team fits my style very, very well. So I found something that I enjoyed. I tweaked a couple of slots to fix some matchups I thought potentially were problematic, and I just kind of ran with it. So don't be afraid to do this. Look at what people are using in Series 8, Tornogre, Venudon, Lapdog, all these different things, and just kind of run with it. So this leads me to my next slide here, one of my last ones. Recommendations for Series 8. This metagame is much easier to quote-unquote call because every single team is going to have 1 restricted Pokemon on it. You know this. If people aren't using restricted, then they are at a distinct disadvantage because they're choosing not to use a Pokemon that's very, very strong that they have access to. Now, ultimately, There are a lot of restricted Pokemon, but you can pretty easily narrow it down to about 10. I would say fewer that are extremely good, maybe about 10 that are like solid, right? You've got Kyogre, Groudon, Zacian. Those are 3 for sures. Then you've got Calyrex Ice, Calyrex Ghost, also very good. You've got Yveltal and Xerneas that are like good, kind of. Yveltal is better than Xerneas right now. Dialga, Palkia, Xerneas. I didn't double count Xerneas. I took a finger down, and then that's 9 that I just listed right there that I've seen consistently. Solgaleo is another one. So ultimately, you know that your opponent's going to have one of these Pokemon on their teams, and a lot of them overlap in the ways that you fight them. Incineroar is fantastic against a lot of these teams. Having having resistances to the key things is very important. So you can start to pick apart the metagame a little bit and start thinking about your matchups. What am I going to do against Calyrex Ghost? What am I going to do against Hard Trick Room? What am I going to do against Kyogre? What am I going to do against Dialga? Like, these are all questions you have to ask yourself to think through. Again, reiterating, it's okay to borrow ideas from other players. That's exactly what I did, and I don't want people to feel bad about it, because it's definitely not something that you should feel ashamed for. Copying somebody else's idea and even running with it verbatim is part of the reason why rental codes exist, right? Like, you can use rentals to help get familiar with archetypes. You know, that's part of the reason why they're there. So taking something that is known to be successful, tweaking it maybe a little bit like I did to something that you really enjoyed, you know, Moltres Raichu, you know, I enjoyed that interaction. I want to try it again. You know, this team has a lot of similarities to this team. So ultimately, I think taking a team like this and running with it and tweaking as you go is a really good idea for Series 8. But ultimately making sure you have something inherently strong on your team that you know is good. Like, you don't necessarily have to copy everybody's Tornogre team, but having Tornogre on your team as like a default, as something you know is very strong, is a phenomenal idea. Fantastic idea. Something that you should definitely be conscientious of. So I definitely recommend having something innately strong. Magic players talk about this all the time as an I win button. If you're not sure what you're playing against, often at tournaments, in the early rounds, you get paired against a bunch of random stuff. Having an easy I win button available on your team is a really, really nice option that can win you a lot of games that you normally would struggle in, right? So having something that's known to be successful is a good place to start. But ultimately, in conclusion, Pokemon is supposed to be a fun game. Pokemon is enjoyable. Play what makes you happy. If you want to use Rayquaza, use Rayquaza. If you want to use Xerneas, use Xerneas. If you want to use Weakness Policy Lugia, use Weakness Policy Lugia. If you want to use Lunala, use Lunala. There's a ton of different things you can do. Just remember, follow these steps that I gave at the beginning. Build around the Pokemon. If you're gonna play with Mewtwo, give it Expanding Force, put it inside the Psychic Terrain, and have things on your team that can beat the things that beat Mewtwo, right? Don't be afraid to experiment either. It can be fun, you know. We did not go into this team here with in Series 6 expecting to do as well as we did, because we were using Volcarona. Nobody used Volcarona, but because we had designed it in such a specific way, we found this really unique metagame scalpel that fixed our Porygon Z matchup and actually made it like reasonably favored for us. We could safely set up Trick Room. We could just continue to drop stats if our opponent tried to intentionally not take a knockout. There was a lot of different things that we could do. So experimenting is great. Using rentals, definitely use rentals. They're fantastic tools. They can let you test out a lot of different teams before you spend all that time breeding. Breeding is taxing. I've been doing it for a long time. I don't have as much time to do it now, but I'm still trying. It takes a while. It's exhausting. It's hard. It can be frustrating. It can be time consuming. Just use rentals to test things out, and then if you do have extra time to do the breeding, then by all means do it. But ultimately, this is my best, a pretty fast guide that I put together for team building. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it, a lot more things that you can consider moving forward, you know, elaborating a little bit more on your hyper offensive team, being able to lower stats and answering trick room on your bulky offense team, having a lot of type synergies and switching potential is really important. So definitely think about what your team is trying to do. Think about the Pokemon you want to be using on it. Think about the supporting cast, what's popular in the metagame, and derive something that you think can beat it. Or slap a weakness policy on your Rayquaza and hit it with a Draining Kiss Comfy and start smacking stuff. Nobody's going to tell you how to play correctly. Just play what makes you happy. And with that, I will leave you all. It's been a fantastic time putting this together. I love this kind of educational content, and I hope you guys got something out of it too. I will catch you all in our next video where we will be talking about my new team most likely. So I will catch you all then.